In this PowerPoint, we're going to talk about a few assessments that are designed to help us assess the whole reader. Often in reading and writing assessment, we look quite a bit at the academic side of the child, and sometimes we forget to think about their interests as well as their motivation for reading and how they perceive themselves as readers and perhaps what their attitudes are towards reading. So there's a few assessments that we're going to look at today that I'd like for you to do with your student. The first is an interest inventory. Now, an interest inventory, as many of you have probably done these with students on the first week of school, or perhaps you've done them yourself. An interest inventory, the purpose of it is to gain insight into the student's interests as well as the things that motivate them, and really how we use this as reading teachers is we use that information to help us choose books for students that are motivating. Obviously, yes, we think about child's reading level, but we also think about their interest, particularly when we're working in a one-on-one context where we're able to provide more support to the student. We can think about choosing books that are not only within the either independent reading or instructional reading, but are also motivating and interesting. So there's a few assessments that are available to you from me. The About Me Interest Inventory is on Edmodo's week 2. It's in that folder. Or the Reading Self-Assessment, that can be found on page 29 in Reitzel and Cooter, and that's just a list of questions probing at students' interests. There are plenty of others. There is no one right interest inventory. If you'd like to make your own, that's completely fine with me. I know that Scholastic.com has several different interest inventories as well. It's completely up to you, but I would like for you to do some sort of structured interest inventory with your students so that you can record interests, so that we can use that data to better inform how to motivate children with the use of books. Now, the second part of this is where we're going to look more at assessing student self-perceptions as well as attitudes about reading. And you have a choice. You can either, depending upon the age of the student that you're working with, you can either assess their self-perception, which is typically better for students in grades 3 through 8, or if they're younger in grades 1 through 6, their attitudes about reading. So why assess self-perceptions and or self-concepts and attitudes about reading? Well, quite a few seminal research studies have reported a strong positive correlation between reading achievement and reading self-perception or concept and attitudes. So what we know, based on some of the research that's out there, is that when students when they perceive themselves as greater or better readers, as well as have a better attitude towards reading, particularly recreational reading, that they tend to maintain that success and continue to read over time, read more than perhaps those children who initially had lower attitudes or self-perceptions towards reading. If you see on this slide here from McKenna, and Ellsworth, they measured student attitudes towards reading using the Elementary Reading Attitude Survey. As you can see, as texts get more difficult around 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, students' attitudes start to drop, particularly in those low and average attitude groups. So it's really something that can be valuable data for us as teachers and teachers as researchers, is to be able to understand our student attitudes towards reading. And here's just another slide showing sort of that Matthew effect that we were talking about earlier. And if you're not familiar with the Matthew effect was coined by Keith Stanovich in 1986, I believe, that for children who have higher, now Stanovich was talking specifically about phonological awareness, but children who have greater phonological awareness and phonemic awareness tend to become better decoders and more fluent, etc., etc. So those who start off rich, so to speak, in those reading skills just get richer as the reading goes, whereas those who have difficulty with those areas continue to strive. And so it's kind of the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Well, we can see this with regard to attitudes towards reading as well. Quite fascinating. And we can see that there's also gender differences possibly in some of this work. This is also from McKenna, Keir, and Ellsworth, where we see girls actually started off with higher attitudes and maintain that to some extent until about 5th or 6th grade. And look at that with boys. I think this says quite a bit about the types of texts that we use and that we value in our classrooms with regard to allowing children to read all genres and all types. So we're going to look at 2 assessments. The first one is the Elementary Reading Attitude Survey, and this is most appropriate for students in grades 1 through 6. And this is the assessment that I talked about a little bit earlier. This one measures reading attitude. So if you look at the questions over on the right-hand side, you can see the little different Garfields. It's a Likert scale using pictures. And we see very happy Garfield on the left. And he kind of moves progressively to not so excited, little sour Garfield there. And the questions are probes. How do you feel when you read a book on a rainy Saturday? Now, the Elementary Reading Attitude Survey is really trying to get at students' attitudes towards reading. And there are 20 items on the Elementary Reading Attitude Survey. 10 focus on recreational reading and 10 focus on academic reading. This is a normed assessment. And where can you find this assessment? Well, you can find it pretty much all over the place. But I found a nice website that has the survey tagged along with the article by McKenna and Keir, as well as, so this is the original article that was published in the Reading Teacher that explains sort of why they came up with the Elementary Reading Attitude Survey, the development of the scale, as well as the actual administering and scoring of the survey, how to use the survey as perhaps a screening measurement throughout the year, actually 2 times in the year. And then it also gives a nice clear-cut directions sheet. So it gives you some indication about how to administer it, how to score it, how to interpret those scores. And then it actually has the reading survey here. So you can see the 20 items. The first 10 recreational, the next 10, how do you feel about stories you read in reading class, so more academic. Now if you notice, the scoring sheet's very easy. 4 points go to the happiest Garfield, 3 to the slightly smiling, 2 mildly upset Garfield, and 1 very upset Garfield. Now I know Garfield is a little outdated. I think Garfield was, I don't know if he was cool when y'all were younger. Garfield was cool when I was a little bit older. But I've actually seen other surveys that have used different characters, but with the same idea. But for the purposes of this class, I would suggest you use Garfield and just stay, if you do choose to use the Elementary Reading Attitude Survey, and just try to use the administration guidelines earlier in this document to help you give the assessment if the student is less familiar with the character. So after you get a raw score for both the recreational and the academic, you can then use this next chart here to get percentile ranks by grade, as well as you can get it for both the recreational as well as the academic. So this is kind of an interesting normed assessment in that it's not measuring academic, it's measuring attitude, which we think of more of the affective domain. Like I said, this is probably best suited for grades 1st through 6th, at least when they were attempting to, or when they normed the assessment, that was the population from which they drew from. The other assessment that we're going to look at, let's scoot down here, is the Reader Self-Perception Scale. Now the Reader Self-Perception Scale is a little bit more targeted than the Attitude Towards Reading survey. It measures self-perception, so how children perceive 4 areas with regard to reading. Their progress, how they observe themselves and compare themselves within a greater class context, as well as social feedback, sort of that notion of getting praise for doing well, as well as the physiological states with regard to reading. So it gives kind of 4 nice different assessment areas. And this is a normed assessment. This is best used for students in grades 3 through 8. That was the norming population. And also, some of the questions are really suited best for older elementary and middle school readers. So I would really suggest that you take a look at both the elementary reading attitude survey and then the Reader Self-Perception Scale. Think about the student that you're going to be working with and decide which of these assessments would get the best picture. Do I need to look at attitude or do I need to look at self-perception? They both are aiming at looking deeper at the affective domain, as well as how can we take what we know from these assessments and better shape our feedback and our specific praise for our students when we're working with them. So both serve a purpose, but think about which one is best for your student. Like I said, on the elementary reading attitude survey, you can go to this website to find everything that I showed you. And then for the Reader Self-Perception, it's in your text on pages 291 through 296. This includes everything, the overview, the administration directions, as well as the scale and the scoring sheet itself. So I'd encourage you to really take a look at each of those assessments. You can also find it here if you want to print it out directly instead of having to photocopy it. So I really encourage you to take a look at both of those, as well as find an interest inventory. So before we meet, you will need to do an interest inventory with your student in either the Reader Self-Perception Scale or the Elementary Reading Attitude Survey. If you have any questions about these assessments, please let me know. Please take time to read over them and to get a firmer idea for what each of those measures. And I look forward to discussing what you find when we meet on site.